Shalom. I'm preparing for the next double Torah portion, Achiri Mot and Kedushim. Achiri Mot means after death, and Kedushim is basically the plural form to say be holy. So it implies holy people, plural. Just looking at the two names of the Torah portions, I just want to give some insights there in relation to our previous Torah portion, or the two Torah portions we've done, which is about Metzora, the leper, and we looked at leprosy as a condition in this fallen state of this current physical world we're living within our creation cycle. The reason I call it a creation cycle is because when we started in Genesis, we read that there was a earth that was covered with water, and following the pattern, we read on, in the time of Noah there was a flood. So that implies that there was a previous creation, and it was cleansed or purged by water, and then the next process starts, the next creation cycle starts. And it's also to do with connecting Bereshit to Revelation, and Revelation, and specifically Matthew 24, talks about the birth process that will take place. Now the birth is preceded by birth pains, or the time of sorrows, and the birth has to do with Judgment Day, what we connect to Day of Atonement, which is actually the first topic of Achiri Mot, the first topic in the first Torah portion we're going to look at this week. So we have the judgment, we have the birth. We also looked at the birth last week, when we look at the woman will be cleansed for 66 days, and if you add up all the purification time frames, it adds up to 120, and 66 and 120 basically colored in between the lines, highlighting the birth and then the purification after the birth, and what the purification is all about. It's all about the time of the Great Tribulation, or the time of the offering. Now, why do I say that? Because that links to this Torah portion, derived from the name Achiri Mot, which is one of the meanings is a smell or an odor, which is normally associated with an offering, and connecting that to the Day of Atonement and the sacrifice of Day of Atonement and the offering. That's also linked to the reason for this Torah portion after death. It is after the death of Aaron's two sons, where they were judged by fire. So that's still in our theme of the judgment and the purging of fire, which is associated with the offering and the sweet smell, aroma. And it's also to do with the final purging and cleansing of the leprous state. Before the foundation, the fire comes down, and then the city will follow, which is the New Jerusalem, which is in effect a cube similar to the Holy of Holies. And that implies that the tabernacle, or the temple of Yahweh, is coming down in the form of the city, and the city represents the Holy of Holies. And then the outer parts around the city is the holy place, and then the further outer outskirts of the land is the outer court, where the nations will be, as we read in Zechariah 14. So that just gives us a bit of an idea of what the next phase will look like, what the next cycle will be like. And it's basically in line with the end of Shemot, with the conclusion of the building of the tabernacle and the glory of Yahweh filling it. And we read in Revelation the tabernacle of Yahweh coming down and his glory filling the whole earth. So his whole earth will be a tabernacle. Taking one step back to Achiri Mot, it starts with an aleph and ends with a taf. That immediately caught my eye. Achiri Mot, in the middle of the Aleph Tav. We all know what Aleph Tav means, beginning and the end. Genesis, Revelation, Aleph Tav, which is also the Aleph Bet, which is also all the words that were spoken in creation, which is the middle letter of Genesis 1 verse 1, the middle word, through whom and through which everything was spoken into existence and created. That is the Aleph Tav, and it's also a symbol of Mashiach, the Word who became flesh and dwelled among us, which is prophetic of Yahweh's glory that will come down and dwell among us. So that's the next level, higher level of intimacy and dwelling with Yahweh is yet to come. Now, within the Aleph Tav, it contains the word Achiri and Mot, or Mo. Achiri Mot. Now, Mo is similar to Midbar, the Mem in front, means to come out of. And the Mem Vav basically has the same function. That means to come out of. And directly next to it is the Tav, so coming out of death, coming out of the death and then the resurrection, the birth process, the symbolism. But it's also Achiri that come out. Now, what does Achiri mean? Achiri is coming out. Now, Achiri is a tribe's name, I think it's the Horites, that are translated as cave dwellers. And they are basically the ones that we found last week who are bound within the dark chambers. So the caves and the dark chambers are similar in symbolism, and the dark chambers was basically the bondage of Babylon and the fallen state, the bondage of the fallen state that is holding man down in this realm, and then the release of the people from that. And the lowest parts of the dark chambers is Sheol, is death, or the realm of death, which is associated with the Tav. So Achiri Mot actually implies the resurrection from the dead, and also the resurrection from the living state, which is the fallen state, but a lower state. So we see the two resurrections in Achiri Mot. The first resurrection is the one from the death, that's the second resurrection, and the first resurrection is the one of the righteous, the living, and they will be resurrected into the new phase, the new creation cycle of Yahweh that's associated with His presence and His new tabernacle that will come down upon the earth. So we see the two resurrections in the word Achiri Mot, after death, after judgment, after the Day of Atonement. So everything is still 100% in line with Daniel 11 that we discussed last week, and everything associated with the second coming of Messiah and the Great Tribulation, the Rabbah, the great suffering that is associated with the birth of humanity into the new realm. And the whole earth and the physical realm is the womb that we are currently in. So we're not born yet. We are in the womb, and some of us have turned and aligned to be part of the first birth. Now, when we see in the storylines throughout Genesis, there's a lot of twins, and we see the first twin and the second twin, and the one birth and the other birth coming from the same womb. So you get the righteous that are born from the womb, and you get the unrighteous that are born from the womb. That's the first and second resurrections as well. So we align ourselves to be part of the righteous resurrection, the righteous birth, and then those who are unrighteous will be part of the second birth, and then they have to go through a cleansing phase in the new cycle. That's described in Zechariah 14. So everything is sort of coming into place and align with what we discovered through the stories in Genesis, the history from the beginning of Adam right through to Moshe, the concept of the twins, the birthright, and the cleansing of the people, which we discussed last week, which is the leprous state and the 3 stages of leprosy. Now, the one stage that is relevant for this week is the more severe one, the leprosy of the head, or the leprosy of the mind, or the leprosy in leadership. And that's where the fire consumed or cleansed the leadership. And it says in Revelation that those who are part of the church, part of the body, will be judged first. And that we see with Nadab and Abihu. Now, the purging of the leprous state within the leadership had to be fully cleansed with the Day of Atonement. Now, atonement is a term that is found in every sacrifice. To make atonement for this, make atonement for the priest, make atonement for the people because of their sin or because of whatever the situation might be. And there's even atonement for the temple and the altar, and there's also the shekel that made atonement. So the half shekel is also connected to the Day of Atonement and the contribution of the silver and people contributing towards Yahweh's kingdom and the work of the kingdom. So all of those things are related to atonement, which is an act. But what we're going to look at this week is atonement as a day. So it's sort of a different realm. It's shifting gears. An act is something that you do anytime, but there's the major atonement that happened in an appointed time. When we saw the language last week in Daniel 11, it talks about the appointed time, and prior to the appointed time, the vile one will come and gather the most wealthy in this realm to be a minority group that will rule over and come and gather the people of the south, the kingdoms of the south, to align and oppose the king of the north, which is Yahweh. And then Yahweh came down and he destroyed that, and we read all about that in the book of Revelation. Now, the day or the appointed time is associated with the appointed times, which is the Moedim, which the Day of Atonement is the one that aligned with the atonement of all the atonements. That's why all the sacrifices were fulfilled by the sacrifice of atonement, which is symbolized by the 2 goats. And the 2 goats, according to John the Baptist, is linked to the Passover lamb, which is linked to the spring festivals, which is Passover and unleavened bread, the first festivals that you enter into. And the fall festivals is trumpets and Day of Atonement, which are the first 2 of the last fall festivals, or the second coming of Mashiach. So you see the pattern perfectly in the day of the appointed time, or it's also known as the day of the Lord, or the day of Yahweh, where he will perform judgment. Now, what happens as a result of the day of judgment? As I said, Achiri is the cave dwellers, and they add up, the word Achiri add up to 128, which is got a fascinating couple of meanings. Of course, there is to tarry, to delay. We saw that last week as well. We also saw the concept of birth, labor, pain, sorrow. But then we see cave dwellers panic. And then there's a separation process that takes place up to the point where it says that Yahweh creates and the creation. So that's the new cycle that follow. So the panic of the cave dwellers are those who are in the chambers of the darkness, who are panicking throughout the process of their cleansing. And they are in a leprous state. And if they humble themselves and repent and get a contrite spirit and a broken heart before Yahweh, then they are elevated to the throne of Yahweh. And they are the ones that you can't count that stand before the throne of Yahweh. And if you can just imagine those who come out of the tribulation standing directly in front of the throne, you had to be holy. in order not to be consumed. So what is protecting you for not being consumed by the fire? It's your contrite spirit. And we saw that last week with the broken vessel, where if you are broken, you receive the benefits that are higher than those of the high priest and the priesthood, and that automatically allows you to come into the Holy of Holies without being consumed. We can also make the analogy or the connection that Nadab and Abihu, they did not have a contrite spirit and a brokenness before Yahweh, and they entered into the Holy of Holies and were consumed by Yahweh's glory, His fire. How do I know that? In this chapter, I think verse 2, chapter 16 verse 2 says that he gave specific instructions to Aaron not to enter the Holy of Holies anymore as he pleased or as his sons did. He didn't say it like that directly, but that's what I derive from it, because it's mentioned that he now can only enter once a year on the 7th month. So the specifics of the Day of Atonement as a Moedim is given here for the first time after this event. And it aligns perfectly. And now we see the link with the Day of Atonement, the judgment, the purification of leprosy, the purification of leprosy within the leadership, absolutely align with the Great Tribulation through the events that we've discovered through the storyline of these Torah portions. So I was fascinated just to see all of those things in the name of this first Torah portion, Achiri Mot. Now the second Torah portion is Kedushim. As I said, it's the plural for Kadosh, and it applies to holy people. And you can also pronounce it as two different words, Kadosh and Am. Now Yom, Yotmem means sea. Now the sea is associated with the nations, so that means holy nations. And that is the ultimate plan of Yahweh, is not only to make His people holy as He is holy, but to make all the nations holy. And the cycles of cleansing that we engage with is applicable to us for our holiness and our cleansing from leprosy, but also to cleanse all the nations from their leprosy. And that's why judgment happened. Now, judgment in relation to Yahweh's appearing, He is a consuming fire. It is dangerous to approach Him in an unholy state. And when He appears, it's the same as Nadab and Abihu appearing before Yahweh in an unholy state or a leprous state. They were consumed by His holy fire. But those lepers who had a contrite spirit, they could stand before the throne of the Father without being consumed, because they have been transformed to the state higher than the priesthood, and they were classified as holy. The other thing that linked with that is what we saw last week, is that if you're completely covered with leprosy, you are allowed in amongst the congregation. It's not contagious, and that is a symbol of newborn babies that's totally covered with blood. They're totally unclean, but they will be cleaned and will be nurtured and will grow up. So those people standing before Yahweh as a result of the Great Tribulation is the harvest of all the babies that's been born as a result of the birth of the Great Tribulation, the Rabbah that took place, the great time of sorrows. So I'm going to leave you with that. It's fascinating to see the Torah portions connect and the storyline continuing, and it all relates to us today as a part of preparation, because we're in the womb and we are kicking and we are uncomfortable and we are moving and aligning, and a lot of things are happening in the womb, getting us ready for the birth. So I'll leave you with that for today, and can't wait to get a bit deeper into the rest of this double Torah portion. I'll speak to you soon. Shalom.